Welcome to the first Holding Change, the Way of Emergent Strategy, and Facilitation and Mediation live. We're going to be doing these, I think this week there's one every day. I'm really excited about these. This is a way for us to sit and talk to each of the contributors, the Black Feminist Magic contributors, the Black Feminist Wisdom contributors, about what they put into this book, Holding Change, which is the one that looks like this. I've had people teasing me because they're like, wow, you're just putting out books all the time. And I'm like, there's so much good stuff happening right now. There's so much to share and so much to think about. So let me see right now if Sage is coming. My love.
Mwah.
Look at your gorgeousness. Hi.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
I'm well, and yourself?
I'm also well. I'm also really well. I just got to reread your essay, so I'm even better than I was even before that. I was just like, this shit is good. No, I'm good. I've got some dupe stick burning, and I kind of did my hair. I did the brush. I brushed it.
Mm-hmm.
That's for you. That was just for you.
On my
And I wore Toni Morrison for you because this, can you see it? Yeah, there
Yeah,
we go.
I can.
So this essay of Sage's starts with a Toni Morrison quote. Do you want to read the Toni Morrison quote that you kicked it off with?
Mm-hmm. Grab it right here.
Yeah.
Mm. Cultural apartheid. Can you hear me okay?
You sound good to me.
Great. Cultural apartheid and/or cultural integration is at the heart of all governance, and informs the way governance compels the exodus of people voluntarily or driven, and raises complex questions of dispossession and recovery. The God, Toni Morrison, from the source of self-regard.
Which that whole book is the God book. I'm just sort of sit with the book, read it Oracle style, let it seep. That's how I was so overwhelmed trying to start that book from the beginning, but then I flipped to the third section and read it there, and then was able to back my way into okay, I'm sitting here. This is Toni Morrison's work. It's all good. So maybe before we jump into, I have a bunch of questions for you about your life as a facilitator that led to the knowing that you offer in this essay. But I wanted to ask, why did you start off with this quote? Why did Toni have to be the way in?
Because I think there's one of the things Toni Morrison continues to ask us and offer us are ways to live in complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Ways to live in complexity with integrity, authenticity, and a particular political analysis.
Yes.
There's a way folks can read and be like, oh my God, the way she uses words is amazing. The way she speaks is amazing. Like the characters are so rich. But honestly, Toni's very clear about why, who, where, how they're positioned, who they're interacting with, who she as the artist is for, so that we can learn how to be and do something different than what we're shown.
That's right. That's beautiful. So for folks who are jumping into this conversation with us but haven't read the book yet, haven't particularly read the essays yet, Sage's essay is called Facilitation as Experiments in Culture Creation. And the essay really is about how the facilitator is playing a role in creating a new culture, creating the culture of whatever future it is that we're hoping to live into by creating that culture in the present. And I think it's a brilliant essay, and I think it's a brilliant essay rooted in a brilliant life. You've really been living and exploring and playing with these things in ways that are so innovative, right? And I really think of you as a sister wife of Emergent Strategy. I feel around the same time we were both ooh, there's something here with physics and complexity and sci-fi and nature we need to attend to. So I want to take us all back into your life And I want to ask you, when did you become a facilitator? When were you like, oh, and one thing before we jump into my questions, I have some questions I think that'll take us most of the time. And I'm going to try to save like 10 minutes at the end. So if other people have questions who've read the text would be amazing. If you haven't, but you're just like, I have questions for Sage, that's also amazing. But this is really focused on being able to access the wisdom of Sage in this moment. But so yeah, when and how, like when were you like, I'm a facilitator? And first gig maybe, or first time it was showing up for you?
I'll say the first time it was showing up for me in a way that I named it as I'm a facilitator was as a member and a participant in Alternate Roots.
Uh-huh.
Is an organization here based in the South for artists and cultural workers. And I have a running joke with some friends. I've been a member of Roots maybe 22 years now. Right? Like that.
Wow.
And Roots has a longstanding ethic. It says, who comes is.
Yeah.
And so what that means is you get thrown into all kinds of things. Like nobody has to have a background in anything. Nobody has. Like they're like, oh, we need someone to, facilitate this meeting. Can you facilitate this meeting? And,
wow.
The answer at that point, sure, and I talk about like what I thought that meant, what that felt like it meant at the time. Which is like, first of all, an incredible amount of responsibility. Like, oh my God, I have to put these folks on my back and carry them through it. Which just because I'm arranged the way I am, I was like, yes, that's what I want to do.
Yes. People on my back. Let's do it.
Let's do it. And so those were really sort of my early opportunities, facilitation. And there's something about, I just like community and being in rooms with people and talking and learning is something that I think is just a gift. And so it just stuck with me. I was like, okay, I'm not sure I'm good at this, but I like to do it.
I'm like, people keep asking me back. We'll see. And you're really unique as a facilitator. You are not committed to pushing people towards something. And so I wanted to ask you to speak a bit, and you talk about this in the essay, but it's always a gift to be in the space with you and watch you work, because it's like, there's no pushing, there's none of that feeling of being like, pushed along. And then yet at the end, we did what we needed to do. And I feel like the way you do that is rooted in values. So I wanted to ask you, what would you say are the values you bring to your facilitation, and have they changed in that 22-year time span?
They have absolutely changed in that time span. The values as a facilitator, first of all, I believe we are collective, right? Like it's a very ecosystem perspective that I live in now, right? I'm not leading, I'm not pushing, I'm like, how do we get here together using everything that we have available?
Yes.
Folks, at this point get used to me. I love food analogies, and particularly the pantry.
Yes.
Right? It's in our pantry that we can create something amazing and delicious together. And part of what I think about my role as facilitator is just presencing us to what is in the pantry, so that we can decide what's the best use of, sometimes there are things in the pantry we're like, we're not actually, this doesn't need that much cayenne, right? Like, that's my and so part of what I believe is, again, something that came out of Alternate Roots early on is you have everything you need. Everything you need is already there. It feels like what I'm going to say is current, is how I would say it. I don't know if I would say this 20 years ago, but everyone has something to offer. Everyone, no matter how they show up, everyone has something to offer to the process, and to what we are collectively making. Responsibility is shared, and you can't, and you want to move with people. You want to move with. And really, I'm a big proponent of like transparency and just being like, hey, something is happening. I'm not sure what is happening here.
That's right.
What's Does someone else have a sense of what's happening? Like
Yes.
the need to be uh, um, a, a leader in a sort of heteropatriarchal masculine, like I'm going to take, is not, it doesn't suit me personally. And I don't think it prepares us for the work. Because I also remember all the time when I'm a facilitator, and it's the same thing as a touring artist, I'm going to leave.
Yes.
You know,
And that's the good news.
I need to come in, I'm going to leave. And
Yes.
I've pushed this along, then what happens to it when I'm gone?
That's
Right?
right.
Like,
That's right. I always feel like that. I'm like, I don't want to magic you into a place that you're not in.
yeah.
Right? Because Cinderella will be back in a pumpkin, and y'all be like, we did not pay for pumpkin. Now we mad. So
You can do this.
I want to ask you to bring in the quantum physics now. I think we're ready for it. So you bring it in, you talk about superposition in the essay, and I just wanted you to teach that concept, reflect on that concept, weave it into your facilitation style.
So superposition has been something I've been playing with for about the last 2 years. I think one of the things I used to really enjoy and talk a lot about was like the wavical, like wave particle duality. It's like the same thing. And that's a conversation around positionality. How are you looking at the same thing in different ways, but it can look and feel different?
Yes.
Superposition is about the layering of things on top of each other to create dynamic systems to create something else.
Yes.
Right? So when I talk about cultural strategy, I talk about history, imagination, and these things are layers to create culture, right? Like, and so when I'm facilitating, going back to the value of everyone is adding something to the room, that we are collectively layering all the wisdom, all of the all the trauma, all the excitement, all of the trepidation, that all these things exist all at the same time. And that's stuff to work with. It's not stuff to avoid or step away from or try and shape. But superposition is an invitation to work with all of that, to see what's actually possible. Like, it is very much around inquiry and excitement in the creation of possibility. So I think about fiction in that way.
I love that too, because I think we talk about nonlinearity and emergent strategy, and I think in people's mind they're like, yeah, instead of going like that, it goes like that. But I'm like, that's still a line. That's still like you're still moving on a line. And I feel like what you're introducing to people is like, it's actually nonlinearity is like moving and in and out and through multiple levels and layers of being, multiple ways of being, and that each group has its own unique set of layers, and each person has their own set of layers, right? Because I think often when we're in a room, there's a way that kind of a Western worldview trains us to quickly categorize, like, okay, y'all are the this people, you're the that people, we're going to categorize this room and reduce it and move that way. And I feel like what you're always inviting in is each of these people, everything is in each of these people. It's all in each of these people, and then together, like, the world is happening in this room. Yeah.
You do a remix of "I'm Every Woman," like, it's all in all.
We're every people. I want to read you a quote that you wrote here. Okay. I'm going to read you back your own self. So for emergent strategy, this is culture building, culture shifting. Success in a process is not about finding the one big perfect solution. Emergent strategy is amplifying the importance of the incremental to impact the monumental. Our facilitation spaces are locations of practice for learning and strengthening culture. Facilitators have tools to invite all participants into a process, and one of our most overlooked methodologies is the making of community agreements. And I felt really gathered by this because I was like, I often am like, oh, let's skip that part. I think early on I was like, it's rules, right? Because people would use the things interchangeably. These are the ground rules. These are the norms. This is the community agreements. And I feel like pulling it back out and being like, actually, the community agreements, the emphasis is on the community that we're building something together. So I wanted to ask you to share a little bit how you've used that tool and what you've seen it make possible in rooms that you facilitated.
So community agreements, and depending upon the body, I use them in a couple of different ways. When folks are new together, the expectation, and you've got the beautiful piece a lot of us are used around brave space, like the ability to invite, and I say this word a lot, invitation, because that's a lot of what we're doing is constantly in creating a place to invite people to sit down, relax, like here, you can be here, be this. And community agreements are a way to give folks a sense of the room that they're in, and show up in it, in whatever way they want to, whatever they need to, but so that they have some sense of like, this is what I'm in, right? And it's a collective understanding, because we all walk in a room with different assumptions around what this room is, right? Even when we know the goals of the meeting or we've been invited, the culture of a space, whether or not we are going to make room, am I going to have to fight my way in to be heard? So many of those things that that we are shaped unintentionally. I talk about in the essay around like the unconscious shaping of culture, right? Like so many of the ways that we don't think intentionally about how culture helps us, pushes us to interact with each other. Community agreements are a way we can stop and name that and say, okay, in this space, I don't know about when you leave the door. I don't know anything about that. I don't know what happened 5 minutes before you got here. But in this space, can we agree to see each other's humanity? And when we're angry, again, this is superposition, right? Like even when they're annoying, can we agree to
not be annoying people?
Yes. Agree to that. Can we agree that everyone here has something to offer? And that is as much an invitation as it is a call in to like a saying like, you can't sit here. No, I'm asking you, because whatever it is you have, we need. We're constantly like, so community agreements become to me a way to start to shape that. Now, I will say I have learned from you in beautiful ways around communities agreement, because there was also a time when I would have a lot of agreements. I'd be like, can we agree to that? And what I realized is I was trying to avoid conflict. Like, oh, actually, this is something that's also been really interesting. Like, I'm not interested in avoiding conflict. It's a question of how do we work through it together? And I think the valuable thing you can leave with a body of folks, right? Like the most valuable thing you can leave is like how to work through a difficult time together.
That's right.
Let's practice that in the facilitation room. Let's practice that in the meeting that we're at together. Ooh, that came up. So what can we do that actually honors our humanity, our dignity, what we all came to offer, and still move us forward and not feel like that's going to stop us and we'll be stuck.
I love that too, because I do think that a lot of, in the past, that's how I've experienced those things too. It's like, oh, if we all adhere to all this whole list of 50 things, there will be no beef. And it's like, no, there's always going to be beef. And I would be surprised. I'm like, but we all said that we weren't going to do that. And then it's like, no, we're still fighting. And instead it's like, I think the agreements, as you're talking about, can help set the culture of the space so that we're having the right fights, right? So it's like, oh, we don't need to be fighting about something that was just an articulation of a boundary or an agreement that we need. We need to fight about like the political differences in the space and like what we want. So you started touching into this, the unintentional shaping of culture. And that was the next question I had was, do you think people are generally aware that they're shaping culture? And I want to ask you inside of this, when you say culture, what do you mean? What is included in culture for you, for us? And then I think people are unintentionally shaping a lot. Why is that? Why aren't we growing up in a circumstance where we're like intentional, right, about shaping the whole culture around us?
So my short description of culture, my short definition of culture is how we be together. Like culture informs everything about how we be together. And that just like our interpersonal, it's also the systems that shape us. It's the systems that are coercive or violent, that require us to do certain things to survive, or like all these things that are shaping how we be together, right?
That's great.
And because of that, and this is one of the gifts of emergent strategy, I think, that's given folks so much breadth, is the idea of culture feels so large. First of all, you don't even know where to start, right? Like, if we be together, well, shit. Like, I mean, where do I start? Where do I start with something like that, right? And so, the facilitation room can be a place of practice in that. And I don't think folks think about culture as shaped. I think they feel shaped by culture, but it's that the super, chicken egg, all the analogies. There's so many, including the superposition. Like it is simultaneously shaping us, and we are simultaneously shaping it. All this is happening at the same time, and if we are not in practice about how to create a different culture, if we don't find those moments where we can try it out, then it just kind of runs roughshod. Because there's so many messages and so many things everywhere we look, pointing us to be a certain way, or what leadership looks like, or what, somebody put the big word in, dialectical, I see it. And this is where we can even talk, I think a lot about grace, and I'm in a lot of places that use the term dialectical, often dialectical materialism, which is very helpful and very interesting. And I often add in that, again, we're layering. I'm like, let's talk about the way Grace talked about dialectical humanism. Right? We can shape the world around us in so many, we can create all these systems and practices, but as human beings, if we can't actually live in them and know how to activate them, then what's the point of the changing of the law or the new system? It's rarely a new system.
I love that. I mean, I think that's why I'm a facilitation evangelist, is that I'm like, we can't, if we're organizing for things we do not practice, then we'll never actually win them, right? Like, we might win the space for them, but having not practiced any of it, we won't be able to occupy that space. And I think I've seen us do that over and over in history, where it's like, we got the policy and it says we're free, but we don't know how to act free because no one held us to practice freedom, right? Everyone kept us in the space of demanding everything we want from someone else, and never in the space of like co-creating what we want together with each other. So right now I feel like we're in a space like that, where we're like, oh, capitalism and white people and men, and they're not going to just like, oh, let me just give us all equality and freedom. And it's actually not about demanding it from them, but about practicing that freedom, practicing it in the here and now. And, I've been going through a massive shift where I'm like shifting from being a futurist to being a nowist in terms of where my practice focus is. And I think reading your essay and your thoughts about culture are a huge part of that, right? Is that I'm like, oh, like everything I want out there is about what I practice now and what we invite rooms of people to practice with each other now. And anyway, I want to say thank you for that. And I also want to ask, what do you think would shift if we were to become more intentional about culture shaping? Like if movement was to, over the next 5 years, say, increase by 50%, how often we were thinking intentionally that this is a practice ground for culture. This is a practice ground for culture. What do you think could shift? And as you're thinking about the answer to that, I want to invite people, there's a Q box or Q question place. If you have questions for Sage, if you have questions about this essay, please ask those questions. I will get to them. And we're talking about Sage's essay in the book, Holding Change, The Way of Emergent Strategy, Facilitation, and Mediation. And someone asked, all of these will be put up afterwards as a series with the Holding Change contributors. So you'll be able to access Sage's wisdom forever, or until Instagram, whatever. So what would shift, right, if we were more intentional about this culture creation?
We are more intentional about culture creation we have, first of all, a clearer direction
Mm-hmm.
about where we want to go, right? It gets into the reform revolution kind of evolution question.
Yep.
Like, that what is possible are things that we might not have ever seen before.
Yeah.
Not because we just created them out of nowhere, but because we have had a lens on what we want to practice and how that feels. So part
Yeah.
of circle a little bit back and say part of the reason community agreements are important is because they're naming the practice,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So culturally, this is what we're going to practice in this room.
Yeah.
And we practice this because we want abolition, or because we want, we want everyone to have, I've been in conversation with elders, we want all of our elders to be able to age with dignity and grace, right? Like these things are endemic.
Mm-hmm.
To do that, we need to be able to imagine differently. We need to be able to weave things together. Um, um, we need to be able to actualize it, like with each other, like with each.
Yes.
So I think that's that the intention of culture creation, because culture is never, it's impossible for it to be a solitary endeavor.
Right.
I mean, a culture of one, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say it's impossible, but there's something in there that I'm just gonna.
I'm like, I mean, I have
It's a,
many cultures in my microbiome, but I understand what you mean.
yeah.
Yes.
I think I talk myself out of something when I say something definitive, and I'm gonna come back to it. There's no such thing. You can't do a culture.
No, right? It's relational.
No, it
It's
is.
relational. Like you can set like routines, you can create a life in solitude for yourself. But I think culture, what you're saying, how we be with each other,
Mm-hmm.
relies on each other being there, right?
And relation of
Yeah,
that at its core, because that's all quantum, all emergence. Like it's something that you're in relationship with, whether it is a person,
yeah,
whether it is an idea, or whether it is a system of being. You're going to be in relationship with something around the creation of culture.
that's right.
So it's
I
all.
love that. And this past year and a half of like everyone having to be forced into a virtual realm as the primary space in which we are moving, facilitating, building with each other. What have you seen in terms of the culture that we're creating in that virtual realm of movement building?
Mm-hmm. I think like most folks, when things moved online, there was that moment of like, oh no, because there had been a real intentional push the last few years. Um, there was a push from folks who had resources, who were like, why do you need to actually meet? Can't y'all do it online? It's cheap.
Yes.
And we were like, no, actually, no, we need to
We need to be together.
be
Yeah.
together in relationship with each other, in a face-to-face, like see your eyes sort of way. And
Yeah.
so when things shut down, I think I mean, a lot of us had this moment of like, oh, okay, so we need to think about what it means to build those types of connections,
Mm-hmm.
outside of our physical geographic proximity, right?
Right. Mm.
The invitation in this time has been, how do we dislodge ourselves from time and space as the primary way to engage connection? What are other ways that we could think about that? Like, it's not just the you are close to me because you are physically close to me. What
Yeah.
closeness? How do you lean into closeness? How do you build closeness? How do you acknowledge closeness and make it visible? Because I think that is actually more the excitement of this
Mm.
time, are amplifying and making visible our interconnectedness and our closeness that doesn't lean into whether physically we can hug each other, right?
Mm.
Had to learn. We've learned that. Um,
Yeah. I really love that. I've been sitting with, Nalo and I've been watching all these nature documentaries and kind of recommitting, re-educating myself into the state of the climate right now. And I'm really sitting with a serious consideration post-pandemic of saying I mostly will not fly anywhere. Like I won't travel to do stuff. And I feel like this has been a time of being like, we can create culture in these virtual ways. And it's not the same. It's different from when we're in the space with each other. And it's still possible to transmute and love each other and be in that close. We've been training. It feels like this past year, we've been training ourselves to build culture that is aligned with disability justice and aligned with climate justice and aligned with potentially what may emerge as pandemic justice, right? It's like, how are we being in a just relationship to the conditions of this pandemic? And so as I was reading that, I was like, oh yeah, like you've been doing this, you've been thinking about this, and this is just another place to practice, right?
And
So
there's, and I think this is again, I feel like I'm going back to superposition a lot, but it's
yeah,
important.
just keep going back there because I don't think we can go too many times.
Because
Like,
what often happens is there's like, oh, we were in person, now we're online, now we can fly again, now we should go back to in person, right? Like, and this is where I love, and folks heard me talk, I love Amilcar Cabral because he talks a lot about, it's not just about pulling from the past. Like there were things that they learned under colonial rule that are actually beneficial, and like how do you pull together in order to create the next culture, right? Like, and so I think there's something we can learn from that. Of it's not like, oh, this was our crutch to get through, but this was a practice and a learning that we can now layer onto how we think about how we build culture, how we facilitate. That now we have more tools, more space, more choice, more creativity about how we move things forward together.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's really good. And I also think it's very much like in my mind, I kind of imagine a Grand Canyon wall of culture where it's like there's these layers of what we have experienced in the past, all of which are part of the dirt, all of which are part of the soil that we walk on, live on. And I keep being like, yeah, and capitalism will be one of those layers one day, and white supremacy will be one of those layers one day, which is not to say that they'll just disappear and no one will ever know that they happened, because we had to shape ourselves against and beyond those systems. We had to survive them, and it's there. And that also means the innovations are like that, like this layer of what we've gone through and are still going through. Because frankly, I'm just like, I was like, okay, Delta variant, like back to my house. Like, I don't mind. Now I know I can go back, right? I know that this is in the range that I have. And we're just going to keep figuring it out together. I want to pivot a little bit now from Sage content to Sage process. So I want to ask you a little bit about the writing process for this. So first I want to ask you, how does it feel to have this essay out in the world? I want to come out to everybody here that I am a fan of Sage's writing and am really pushing Sage to write a book, a whole book on this stuff. And so this feels like a first, like, let's get over this step of just getting this essay out, which is so delicious and wetting everyone's palate. And how does it feel to you to be palate wetting, to have the essay out, to like be sharing these ideas publicly?
It's wild. It's wild. It's wild. I was sharing with Muti earlier as I was rereading it myself, and I was like, this is actually today's the first time I've reread it since I finished it.
Oh, that's yummy. I know that piece. I know that practice. You're
like it's gone. It's off. And there were a couple sentences in there. I was like, okay, so it was a little.
I wrote a sentence.
We, part of it is also learning what my voice is something we've talked about a lot around, like how I write and getting comfortable with what's comfortable to me to express things, right? Like there's and there's a whole lineage of folks that want to tell you like how you should write, right? Like, this idea of like you write on an 8th grade level, or you write it, so people can understand it. And Moots and I were talking about it, because I was like, some of my favorite folks, like Kathleen McKittrick, or we were saying Fred Moten. Like, I get
Fred Moten. I was about to say, you better say Fred Moten, because it's like, yes,
I'm reading that same 200 pages for like 5 years. Like, I'm like, right? Like, and I'm like, and I'm like, if that's what gets me jazzed and that's what gets me just like, there's such a plethora of different types of writers in the world.
Yes.
I don't have to be any kind of one of them except my own. And I think this is part of what I've learned in writing this. And I did another piece for the National Black Theater this year, and I was like, oh, okay, all right. Yeah, it's taken a minute to marry the practice to the writing.
Yeah.
And I was sharing with a friend that I think it's part of a work ethic, right? Like that I come out of this like, oh, I need to be doing the thing, right? Like, and
Right.
like actually the back to the dialectic of the doing and the writing and the sharing as you go along, and as you're learning,
Exactly.
that puts us in relationship that feels really good.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's part of being in community as facilitators versus being, I'm like being just a pure writer, right? A purist, like in that zone. Because I'm just like, oh, like I look back at almost all my stuff and I was like, I could have probably written that better. But the thing that was important to me was to be in community in conversation about that thing, and perfecting it would not have necessarily gotten me in that conversation. I would have just been like, here's a really perfectly written essay that took 12 years past the point when that was relevant or whatever. Because perfection, I don't even know if it's ever possible as a writer,
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that what you wrote feels clear, and it invites us into something that maybe many of us are not thinking about yet. And you do that really gracefully and really skillfully. So I want to ask you, what was your writing process? Like from the period where you first were like, this is an idea, to the period where you actually hit send on the essay. Like, what'd you do?
So, well, when you asked first, I froze and was like, I don't know. I don't know what I would say. Like,
I remember that.
and I'm a title writer first.
Yes,
I'm
that's awesome.
That's why I'm a title writer first, and I think about culture, how culture moves, um, in all kinds of ways, in a lot of ways. And I was like, oh, let's marry the the development of culture and facilitation as practice space
Yes.
in a way that so the invitation allowed me to sit down and think about, actually, as a facilitator and as someone who at her core says everything I do is about culture and cultural strategy, how do they live together, right? What do I have to offer about these things in the way that they relate to each other? And once I asked myself that question, I was like, oh, because it's practice. It's practice, right? Like it's practice um, uh, in a way that um, most times is relatively low stakes. I would say most times, but it's the space that we can be in for a couple of hours together and learn that something else is possible collectively, and really thinking. So that question of, I'm thinking about culture, how culture shared, how it's cultural dissemination, how do we build it, how do we invite folks into an active practice of culture shaping.
Yep.
And then this book is on facilitation, right? Like, and as a facilitator, I wanted to be really clear about what I'm doing when I'm in the room, right? Like, I want to, and so this also was helpful for me to be clear with anyone. Like, my running joke is always when someone asks me to facilitate, I'm like, are you sure you want me? Because I'm really clear about what I do and what I bring, right? Like
That's
this,
right.
right? So this is
I was like, there's a red pill and there's a blue pill. There's a sage pill. Okay. I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I think the final question I have for you is, how do you want people to use your essay as they're moving forward as facilitators and mediators? Like, how, like in your dream of people being able to make use of this, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. In my dream of people being able to use this, it looks like conversations about what we want to practice, the actual practice of it, and then understanding what we've learned so that we can try and practice either something else or deepen the practice. Right? Like, I want this essay to spark that kind of, I talk about culture, but I'm a culture strategist, right? Like, so I'm always thinking How are you learning from it? What are you practicing? What does it mean about the next iteration? I'm also double Aquarian, which also makes the next
Okay, that's important.
thing, you know.
I'm a visionary. Yeah.
And so that would be my dream, is that folks take gatherings of folks. Anytime we're gathered together, is an opportunity to practice what we need, the capacities, the skills, the relationships that we need to live in a truly liberatory future.
Mm. Yeah. Maybe so. I love that. So now I'm going to come over here to the question box, and just a reminder, so there's the chat box and then there's the question box, and the question has a little, it looks like a little Q inside of a bubble. And if it's just in the chat, I can't track all that. It's too many things too fast. But if you really want me to ask it to Sage, put it in the question blurb, and I will go there. So the first question we have is from Bo Gordon. Would Sage speak to the 5 senses as modes for creating culture and being with each other?
Mm-hmm. So I can speak to I will speak to how I use the 5 senses.
Great.
Part of what I think is important in the ability to create culture is context, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's in order to think about how you're being, how you're shaping, you also, again, back to this dialectic of how you're being shaped. And so our senses, and I would argue that there are more than 5 that we can access, you know.
I think so too.
You know, help us understand like what we are being in relationship to and what is in relationship to us. So when if you want to get specific about the see, hear, touch, smell, and taste, I love the work of the People's Institute Survival and Beyond, because they use that to do like a power analysis of what's going on in the world. So you can use the 5 senses to really think about what systems are shaping you on your very body, because that's the other part around facilitation. Like we can talk, we can write about a lot of things, but facilitation is on our actual physical bodies.
Yes.
With together, whether we're in physical like relationship with each other, but we are talking about people in our bodies.
Yes.
How we interact. And so the senses are part of the embodiment of facilitation.
I love that. It's so interesting too that we can have our own leaning towards senses, right? Like I'm very much like, what is felt? What can you feel? And for years I would facilitate without food and drink. Like I wouldn't think about the taste sense and like caring for the body in that way. And then people would be like, I'm ravenous and I'm hangry and it's really impacting my brilliance. And I realized that food is one of the central pieces of culture, and all of them are, but I appreciate that. The next question we have here is, Dear Sage, if you had to choose one method for bringing people into a space, music, food, visual art, etc., if you're limited, basically, which one would you choose? And this comes from an Alice B. Francis.
So that's a great question, right on the heels of what you just said, Adrienne.
No, I'm like, food. Yeah.
You know, complex movements early on, we had a say, if we ain't eating, we ain't meeting. You know, like that.
T-shirt. That needs to be a T-shirt.
Yeah. So it's all day. As just how do we food is such a space of connection. I know folks here have watched High on the Hog, or like there's so many things around food. I can't wait for the Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah, same.
Just how do we think about food, but also when we show up to environments feeling nourished, feeling cared for. So it's both our internals, like I feel
right.
I have something to offer because I feel grounded, I feel satiated.
Yes.
And someone has thought enough of me to make sure that I can feel that way in this space.
Yes.
Up a pathway to connection that I don't know that the other ones do in the same way.
Yum. I love this too, because I'm thinking of like the last time I got to come be in the physical meeting space with you, and you had made us a gumbo, and you gave us kind of a history of like, here's the deal with gumbo. Like there's a lot of particularities to it. It felt like it got incorporated into a huge part of the meeting. So I was just like, this is delicious, and this is about the divergence that can exist inside of something that we think of as the same. So I have a question here from Amora Blessing that says, as someone who is very isolated and alone most of the time, largely due to disability, how do you vision those like me to best incorporate this book into our lives?
So I will say one of the things that we have heard almost across the board from all of our friends who are working disability justice, or who are thinking about disabilities, this time of online or shutdown where folks are like, oh no, I'm isolated. The things that we have learned help us create a world in which we don't, where we're practicing things that support folks who have disabilities or in other ways, right? Like and so that's also been sort of my push to like back against folks who are like, do we have to do it all together? Like, who do you want to be? How do you want folks to show up? And even then there's a constant offering. So I would say to, I lost the name, but I would say to
Amora Blessing.
Amora Blessing. Ooh, Amora Blessing.
Amora Blessing is one of our major emergent strategy supporters. Like I think shows up to almost everything we do and just like rides really hard for us. So always ask great questions. So
well, thank you, Amora Blessing, because I think again, we're talking about culture creation, right? So we are talking about how do we use, I would hope folks use the piece in the book to really think intentionally about what kind of spaces they're creating, and how they sit for everybody. They sit for everybody. I think that's really what I hope for, and I think that's what we're practicing and learning a lot now in the moment.
That's great. A question from Elsa Amy is, what facilitation or mediation training would you recommend? How does one begin this journey?
Well, I know Aorta has a fellowship out right now, so shout out. Whoop, whoop. So if you're not familiar with Aorta, go onto their website. They're doing facilitation training. Emergent Strategy, we have facilitation training that if you're here, it feels like you're almost like halfway there, you know.
Yeah.
Around
facilitation. Like this. It's a lot like this.
I also love the People's Hub and Training for Change. I will say these are specific places, and also Black Feminist Futures and their facilitation for movement. Other places I'm naming are folks who are thinking about facilitation inside a political context. Yeah. And I think that's important in the times that we live in. I think, again, there's the perception of facilitator as an objective observer. I love Makani's piece in the book.
It's so good.
Or as someone who, you know, like as if there aren't political and ideological things happening anytime.
All the time.
All the time, right? So that's why I'm very specific about places that I feel like are talking about facilitation with a political analysis engaged in it.
I love that. I love that. The next question we have here is from Raven Cassell. It says, I'm a playwright and I view my work, which is creating text for folks to gather around, to meditate on, and embody, as facilitation. Can either of you speak to performance, community, culture?
Let's say that. I view my work as facilitation. I'm missing the last half of that. Can you say that again?
Yeah, can either of you speak to performance, community, culture? And I think it's like, as a playwright, like creating these plays where people come and they're in it, they're practicing, they're performing. That is also a facilitative space.
So part of I asked for clarification because I think they're immediately two different pathways that I think this question could take me. So I wanted to
You're like,
helpful. So I think there's performance community culture, and I want to recognize that you're naming yourself as a playwright, right? Like I think so. I want to make the distinction between your work as a playwright and what might be an ensemble practice, right? Like the creation of work, right? That being said, as a playwright, and you're talking about performance community culture, my question would be, as a playwright, and as not just someone who writes the text, but I see you talking about gather, meditate on. Inside the work, what are you offering for folks around how they engage? How do your characters relate to each other? What is the practice? How do you understand? And so I think there's some great, I'm a little far away from my bookshelf, but there's some really wonderful texts um, on performance and sort of like community relations and how you build. I also think that part of one of the things, which is why I'm talking about culture and its largest in my imagination, in its largest sense, is because artistic expression is as much as facilitation a practice space, right?
That's right.
It's an invitation. So how you shape your work, who gets to see it, where does it go? Like all these things are about how we be together.
That's great.
You know, like is your as your work is to like where you gather folks, you know, what do you want from a proscenium theater space versus you know, in the park, or like what are you trying to signal for folks to engage and have a conversation upon that then creates more space for them to practice that post the engagement. That's always like when I'm talking about like performance work or whether it's complex movements, it's like there's so much that happens in the moment, but what you're really hoping for and asking for even intentionally is what happens when you leave. Again, what happens when folks leave? I'm always interested in like what do you go home to practice, or what do you do differently? And like,
I love that. I want to uplift the work of Lynn Nottage as a playwright who I've just been fascinated watching her process of talking to places beforehand, then writing plays that are directly related to what's happening in that place and trying to shift something that's happening in that place based in what people said they needed to shift. And I'm just like, oh, that is, you know, art is medicine in that, you know, it's like facilitation can be a way of moving your medicine into the community as well. So I love that.
you got
Yeah, go ahead.
think about Ebony Noel Golden and the series that she's been doing. They're ensemble creations, but they're just like, what are we practicing? Like whenever I watch the videos or when I've seen the work, like I'm like, ooh, what a practice! Like, what
yes,
bring folks.
Yeah, and there is something. I mean, that's actually one of the places where I'm like, what can happen in person is still can be so delicious, and where I'm really getting into like, okay, how do we make that deliciousness local, right? Like, how do we localize what we're shaping with culture and what we're doing with art in a way that still keeps us in a global, dynamic, interconnected relationship, right? We have 2 more questions, and I think maybe those will be the final questions that we'll do and then wrap it up. So this one piece is, what kind of cultural legacy do you want to impress into the collective?
Actually, that surprisingly, that's an easy one because I think about this a lot. I want to grow a culture of inquiry. I want to ask questions. I want to encourage us all to ask questions. I feel like question asking um, is it's humbling. It is an invitation. It is this curiosity. I think one of the things in rooms where we get stuck in facilitation is when we've lost our sense of curiosity of each other. Right? And you know, I'm curious. Like I don't agree, but I'm curious as fuck. Like I want to know. Like really, I sometimes it gets you in trouble because I was on the Nextdoor app, and this woman was like, I saw a woman and her children in 90 degrees, and I called the police, but they never come. And I was like, why is that your first impulse?
Right.
Like, why is that your, like, it's 90 degrees outside. You see a woman and a 4-year-old and an infant, and your first impulse is to call the police?
Yeah.
There's something about that I'm just like, I can both be like horrified. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the? That's your where? Why?
Right.
Like, what do you think that's gonna do? Like, there's something that I don't know that you seem to think is going to happen, right? Like, I'm like, so this question, this curiosity, to me is what I hope is a vestige. I don't know, person like whatever that is, long after.
And then there's a question about lateral violence in community, and the question is around support groups for it, which I'm like, I'm not sure that that's something that you'd have, but and maybe if you do, if you want to throw that in there. But I think the thing that might build a bridge to this conversation is how does a room, how does a facilitator hold the culture of a space in which lateral violence happens? Like, how do we let that build culture, or like what happens when that lateral horizontal violence happens in a space we're facilitating?
So I think this harkens back to something I said earlier, which is that one of the best gifts and offering of facilitation is supporting folks in spaces just like that, right?
Yes.
Like, so the ability to name that's what's happening.
Yeah.
The ability to presence folks in the room, like this is what has happened or is happening.
Yes.
The collective conversation around, like, so what are we going to do about it? Because it's not my responsibility just because I'm the facilitator, right?
That's right.
So this is an abolition practice we're talking about, right? Like, what do we collectively figure out? What do we need to do about this? Who needs protection? How and where is a part of, ideally, we can sometimes go back to our community agreements to help us understand, like, where the body want to engage this moment, and also recognizing that some of the most valuable things you can do in that moment is actually engage that moment, not pretend it didn't happen, and worry about the strategic plan later.
That's right.
Right, like worry about that later. Yeah. So that's what I offer around that.
No, I love that too, because that was why I was sort of like, oh, I don't know if it's support groups. Like, the goal is to be able to have those moments and have the group together support each other and be in it and let that shape the culture. I always think that people get so isolated if they're the one who brings up something's happened, or this is, the oppressions from the external world have happened in here. And I'm like, of course, they're definitely going to happen here. Like, that is what happens when humans show up together who have all been socialized by these major systems. And our goal is to be together and create something different in this moment, like when the harm happens. And that, what that example you gave of, like, yeah, we want to call someone, and again, outsource that, send it somewhere else. Instead of being like, I'm going to open my door, I'm going to invite you in, I'm going to be with the humanity of this moment, to the extent that I'm able, So thank you so much. Thank you for saying yes to the invitation. Thank you for making something really exquisite and understandable and evolving. Like, it feels like a piece where I am excited for people to read it, because I think reading it means they'll have to shift how they think about what they're doing. And that's what I wanted the book to feel like. It's just like, oh, here's this, just reading it will change my cellular structure as a facilitator. Like, that's the goal. And I feel like you really achieved that. And really excited for the book that will follow this essay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to share or point people to or uplift before we hop off?
Oh, I saw in the chat, so it looked like some folks missed my reference to the Institute. So I do want to just rephrase the Institute for Survival and Beyond. Things I'm really excited about coming up: Black Feminist Futures Jubilee. Is
Yes.
like, I think that, and I'm thinking about things that bring us together in ways that create newness. And so, yeah, I'm just grateful for the ask and the opportunity. Always.
Yeah.
You, Adrian. And
I adore you. And you know, I think I'm excited because I do feel like people will look back at this when your book is out and your albums are out and all the other things that you are creating come out and be able to be like, oh yes, all of this is the culture. All of this is the culture creation. And that's what Sage was pointing us to. And like, here we are doing it. So thank you.
I'll do it.
Thank you to everyone who showed up. Hi, Esther in Ghana. I see Cielo. I see Idrissa. I see so many of our beloved ones. I saw Jody. Thank y'all for tuning in. You could do so many things with your evening. And we're going to be doing this all week. So every day this week, there's a session. Tomorrow, we're talking with Autumn. Wednesday, it's Alexis. Thursday, Makani. And Friday is Adaku. So it's going to be a powerhouse week. Most of them are happening as like a lunch break offer. So look for the live around noon. We'll be posting each of them into an IG Live TV series here, so you can revisit them, send friends to look at them. There's many ways to experience a book. And we're also moving towards an audiobook of Holding Change, where each of the contributors are reading their own pieces into the book. So manifesting all the things. We're really excited about it. I think that's it. We love y'all. Have a great night.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.